Hello everyone, welcome to Legacy IAS Academy. In this video, we will discuss the issue of suspension of MLAs from Maharashtra Legislative Assembly and also the opinion of Supreme Court in this regard. Today, in the Hindu newspaper, there is an article titled Limits of Power. So this discussion will revolve around this particular issue. Let's see what is the context. 12 MLAs were suspended from Maharashtra Legislative Assembly for an year of 1 year. For 1 year term, this is important in order to understand the crux of this particular discussion. And such a move by the Legislative Assembly was termed unconstitutional by the Supreme Court. Okay, I'll repeat, such a move which suspended 12 MLAs from Maharashtra Legislative Assembly was termed unconstitutional by the Supreme Court. And Supreme Court also said that maximum term of any suspension cannot be more than a particular session. Supreme Court said that maximum term of suspension cannot be more than a particular session. This is the opinion of Supreme Court. Okay, we'll see what are the issues. There are various dimensions to this particular issue. Okay, the first dimension that we'll be discussing in this particular video is the provisions for suspension. What are the provisions in order to suspend a MP or an MLA? Okay, when it comes to an MP, we will also be discussing different rules for Lok Sabha and also Rajya Sabha. Different rules in order to suspend Lok Sabha MP and also a Rajya Sabha MP. The second dimension is the issue of judicial activism and also the issue of checks and balances. When we are discussing judicial activism, I'll also tell you what do you mean by judicial review and also judicial overreach. How these three terms are different. Okay. The third dimension that we'll be discussing in this video is the privileges of the House. What are the different privileges of the House? There are two different privileges that we'll be discussing, and we'll also be discussing the issue of autonomy. Okay, the issue of autonomy will also be discussed in this video. First one, what are the provisions for suspension? Rule 53 of Maharashtra Legislative Assembly says that Speaker may direct or any member who refuses to obey his decision. Speaker may direct any member who refuses to obey his decision or whose conduct is in his opinion grossly disorderly to withdraw immediately from the assembly, which means speaker can direct any member to withdraw immediately from the assembly. This is the Rule 53 of Maharashtra Legislative Assembly. Here we should also know, similarly, different legislative assemblies can have different rules for the suspension of MLAs. Okay, this can be concluded. For example, Karnataka, also Tamil Nadu, Andhra Pradesh or Bihar for that matter can have their own particular rules in order to suspend the MLAs. This is an example of federalism. Okay, this is an example of federalism. Remember, this is an example of federalism. Now let's see what are the provisions to suspend a Lok Sabha MP. Okay, a Lok Sabha MP. Rule number 373. Rule number 373 says Speaker can ask any member to withdraw immediately from the House for a particular day. This is rule number 373 of the rules of procedure of Lok Sabha. Rule number 374 says that speaker can name a member and then pass a resolution to suspend from the remaining term of the session. Know the difference between the rule number 373 and 374. In the rule number 374, a speaker can name a member and the resolution should be passed. In the rule number 373, there is no need for resolution. But when it comes to rule number 374, resolution has to be passed in order to suspend a member from remaining term of the session. In the rule number 373, the suspension is for the remaining term of the day. In the rule number 374, it is for the remaining term of the session. And we also have 374A. Also, tell me, what do you mean by 374A? What does this A signify? Okay, comment this in the comment box. What does this A signify? We will also have Article 51A. We also have something like this. Okay, what does this A here and what does this A here signify? I want you to comment in the comment box. In the rule number 374A, a MP who persistently and willfully disobeys the rules can be named by the speaker and stand suspended automatically. Automatically, in the sense there is no need for resolution. So you can conclude there are provisions in the Lok Sabha rules with which an MP can be suspended with or without passing a resolution. So in the prelims examination, there can be a statement saying that passing a resolution is necessary in order to suspend a Lok Sabha MP. This statement is incorrect. Because according to the rule number 373, speaker can suspend an MP even without a resolution. And also, according to rule number 374A, he can be suspended without passing a resolution. Now let's see what are the rule numbers for suspending an MP from Rajya Sabha. Rule number 255 says a chairman of the Rajya Sabha can direct a member to remain absent for rest of the day. According to rule number 256, speaker can, this has to be chairman, okay, because we do not have a speaker in Rajya Sabha. Chairman can name a member and resolution has to be passed for suspension not extending the remaining time of the session. Okay, this is the rule number 256. So you need to remember the rule number 255 and 256 are for the suspension from Rajya Sabha. 373, 374 and 374A are for suspension from Lok Sabha. You can also remember few weeks back there was an issue where 12 MPs from Rajya Sabha were suspended for disreputable behavior in the monsoon session. Okay, because of this issue and also the issue of suspension of MLAs from Maharashtra Legislative Assembly, the issue of suspension becomes important from the preliminary point of view. From the prelims examination point of view, for the year 2022, the issue of suspension becomes very important. This is how we at Legacy IAS Academy predict preliminary questions. Okay, from our question bank, we can have maximum number of questions coming in the UPSC prelims examination. Okay, now let's discuss the issue of checks and balances. What do you mean by checks and balances in the Constitution? You all know the entire governance entire governance is divided into three organs. We call these as the organs of government. That is executive, legislature and judiciary. We also call this as separation of powers. We also call this as separation of powers. Separation of powers is the basic structure. Separation of powers is the basic structure of Indian Constitution. I want you to comment here, when did this particular concept of basic structure come into existence? I want you to comment in the comment box, when did this particular issue of basic structure come into existence? So these are the three organs of governance. What do you mean by checks and balances? These three organs of governance are not watertight compartments. Okay, these have mutual rights over each other. These have mutual rights over each other. Executive and legislature checks the judiciary. In the sense, legislature will oversee the functioning of judiciary up to some extent. Similarly, judiciary through a term called judicial review, okay, and also Article 32, which is also a basic structure of Constitution, checks the functioning of legislature. For example, if a law is passed from the parliament, if the law is passed in the parliament, then we have something called due process of law. According to due process of law and judicial review, Supreme Court or the High Court will see the just nature of the law that is passed. Okay, by this a judiciary will keep a check on the laws passed by the parliament. We can also see a second example. In which the judges of Supreme Court are repealed or removed from parliament. Okay, they are removed from the resolution passed in the parliament. This is how parliament keeps a check on judiciary. I hope you have understood the issue of checks and balances. In this particular issue, the Maharashtra Legislative Assembly took a strict measure to suspend MLAs, and this was overturned by the Supreme Court. Here the judiciary has exercised its power over the assembly. Okay, I hope this is clear. Here we also have judicial activism and judicial overreach. These are two important terminologies that you have to know. How is judicial activism different from judicial overreach? There is a very thin line between judicial activism and overreach. Judicial activism is when judiciary fills the vacuum that is present in parliament. Okay, during the time of migrant laborers who started migrating from urban areas to rural areas during the COVID-19 induced lockdowns. During COVID-19 induced lockdowns, Supreme Court took this issue and said it is the responsibility of state governments to provide the facility for transportation. Okay, this is a particular example for judicial activism. When the judiciary crosses its line and it hinders the autonomy of executive and the parliament, we call it as judicial overreach. I hope you have understood this. We also have a third third dimension that we are discussing now, the privileges of the house. Privileges of the house. The privileges can be divided into individual privileges and also the collective privileges of the house. What are the individual privileges? Individual privileges refers to the privileges given to MPs and MLAs. Okay, these are individual privileges. Collective privileges is the privileges given to the house. What are individual privileges? Freedom of speech in the house. Okay, very important. Freedom from the arrest in civil actions and not in criminal. Not in criminal. Remember this. It is not in the criminal cases. Exemption from jury duty. Exemption from being attendant in the courts as a witness. Freedom from obstruction and interference and intimidation. What are the collective provisions? Collective provisions are to deal with the breach of privilege, to deal with the breach of privileges, to regulate its own internal affairs. This is a collective provision that has come into question in this particular issue. Okay, this is a collective provision. And it is also to maintain the attendance and service to the members, to institute and inquire and demand the papers, to call witnesses to appear and administer the oaths to them. These are the collective privileges and these are the individual privileges. You need to know these. You need to know these, and it also can be asked in prelims exam, and also in the mains exam. And also if there is a particular issue going on related to the parliamentary privileges, and you can also expect a question in your mains examination. In this context, I want to discuss these four articles with you. Article 122 of the Indian Constitution. Remember, Article 122 of the Indian Constitution says courts should not inquire into the proceedings of the parliament. Okay, remember this. Article 122 says that courts should not inquire into the proceedings of the parliament. Okay, this is an example of autonomy. This is an example of autonomy and separation of powers. Agreed? Agreed? Article 212 of Indian Constitution says courts not to inquire into the proceedings of the legislature. Courts should not inquire into the proceedings of the legislature. This is also the example of autonomy and separation of powers. If you are asked a question related to separation of powers in your mains examination, you have to know these four articles. I will not be discussing Article 211 and 121 with you in this video, but I want you to comment the provisions of Article 121 and 211 of the Indian Constitution, which are also related to autonomy and separation of powers. I hope I'm clear with this. What is the conclusion? What did the Supreme Court tell at the end? Supreme Court said suspension of MLAs for one particular year, for one complete year, following the alleged misbehavior in the house is unconstitutional. It is unconstitutional. Why? Why did Supreme Court tell this? Because Supreme Court said if a member is suspended for one particular year, his constituency and his people will be deprived of their right to represent. Okay, because of this, such a suspension for 1 year was termed unconstitutional. Okay, and it is illegal and also irrational on the part of Legislative Assembly of Maharashtra. This was the view taken by Supreme Court. Let's discuss a question now. Okay, the question goes, how are MPs suspended from the house? How are MPs suspended from the house? In order to attend this part of the question, we should know the different rule numbers for Lok Sabha and Rajya Sabha. We have discussed this in the video. Okay, do you think judicial activism in this context violates the basic structure of constitution? Okay, this can be a 15 marker. This can be a 15 marker in GS paper 2. Okay, try attempting this question. We have discussed this particular issue in the video. Okay, for more such enriching content, please subscribe to Legacy IAS Academy and have a nice day. Thank you.